in this episode, where one of the students had this question if they can use a digicam or a point and shoot camera for dental photography and documentation. Now the answer to that is, if you want to force yourself to use a mobile phone, well, you can. Now for people who are afraid that the older cameras are not going to help, it's completely a myth. The next question is, a lot of people ask me whether they can use mirrorless camera for dental photography and documentation. So the answer to that is you're listening to the Dental Photography School podcast, where I'll be sharing practical tips on clinical and general photography. I'm Dr. Mayur Dauda, and I've been coaching dentists and dermatologists on clinical photography since 2013. If you don't want to miss out on any action, make sure to subscribe to my show because I release an episode every Saturday morning. In our previous episodes, we have seen which is the best camera for dental photography, and we have also seen which is the best lens for dental photography. But I still get a lot of questions from people asking if they could use a particular camera for dental photography. So I thought it would be a great idea to record a podcast called which is not the best camera for dental photography, which is what this episode is all about. So let's understand which is not the best camera for dental photography. Number one, I just recently delivered a lecture in Dr. D.Y. Patil University School of Dentistry, where one of the students had this question if they can use a digicam or a point and shoot camera for dental photography and documentation. So the answer to that is no. For dental photography and documentation, you require to mount a macro lens onto your camera body. So a point and shoot camera frequently does not allow you to interchange lenses. So you cannot use a point and shoot camera, although it might have a macro mode. You still cannot use it because you actually want a 100mm macro lens to go inside the camera body, because that's the best lens for dental photography and documentation. So the bottom line over here is no, you cannot use a point and shoot camera for dental photography and documentation purposes. A lot of people ask me whether they can use a mobile phone for dental photography. Now the answer to that is, if you want to force yourself to use a mobile phone, well, you can, but you are going to end up getting a lot of distortion, because mobile phones have something called as wide angle lenses on them, and they cause a lot of distortion. Also, you need to answer this question for me if you are a mobile phone dental photography pursuer. In mobile phone photography, you cannot play a lot with your f numbers. But one of the most important settings for dental photography and documentation that everybody needs to understand is we love to shoot at high f numbers because we want a deeper depth of field. Now, the question for the mobile dental photography pursuers from my side is, how are you going to achieve f of f25 or f22 because you want a deeper depth of field? It's impossible, because if you keep those kind of f numbers, you will be forced to use a flash, and mobile phones do not have a flash. They have an inbuilt LED light, which is not that great. So a flash is not the same as a continuous light source like an LED light which is present in the phone. Question back to the mobile phone people who ask me if they can use a mobile phone or not is, number one, can you shoot at higher f numbers like f18, f20, and are you going to get distortion or not? Because you are going to get distortion when you use a wide angle lens. A lot of people ask me if they can put an external lens onto the lens that's actually there in the mobile phones, and I've answered this in the podcast, which is the best lens for dental photography and documentation. So do check it out. Moving on to the next one. A lot of people who have purchased a DSLR a couple of years ago, they frequently say that can they use, for example, I have one participant coming up from Chennai for my forthcoming course on January 24th, 25th and 26th. That's going to happen in Mumbai. So he was asking that he has Canon 1100D and can he use it or can he get it for learning dental photography. Now, for people who are afraid that the older cameras are not going to help, it's completely a myth. You need to understand that you can use any DSLR for documentation purposes. It does not matter if it's an old camera or a new camera. It's definitely going to work, and you can do dental photography with it. All you need to do is mount the right lens on your camera and you're good to go. You can use your inbuilt flash if you have, or you can also purchase a ring flash or a twin flash of your choice. That'll be completely up to you, but you can definitely use old cameras like Canon 1100D or Canon 1200D or any other Nikon old cameras also. If you have, you can definitely use it. So don't keep in your mind that you have an old camera so it'll not be that great. That's not true. You can use old cameras for dental photography and documentation as well. Some people also have a budget constraint, so instead of going in for a new camera, you can also go for a used camera. If you have budget constraints, it's completely fine. If you buy a 550D or a 500D, if it's in a good condition, you can definitely go ahead and buy it for documentation, for clinical photography. So don't really worry about that. The next question is, a lot of people ask me whether they can use mirrorless camera for dental photography and documentation. So the answer to that is, yes, mirrorless cameras are great. They are light in weight, but it's not really time yet to invest on a mirrorless camera as far as I think. Because if you see, there is hardly a difference of 10 to 20 grams if you consider a good mirrorless camera as compared to a basic DSLR camera. There's hardly a difference of 10 to 20 grams. It matters, yes. Even the 10 grams or 20 grams matters a lot. But the question that you need to ask yourself is, the mirrorless cameras have a completely different mount. Let me give you an example over here. The Canon's mirrorless mount is the EOS R series, or the mirrorless series. So we have the Canon EOS R, which is a full frame. We have Canon EOS RP. So these are all a different mount altogether. But these are full frame mirrorless cameras, alright? So they're going to be expensive and they're going to be heavy again. So it's not really helping us. So if you want to go for really good mirrorless cameras, so that's the full frame category in the Canon series. So you have EOS R, you have EOS RP, you have EOS R5, you have EOS R6, but all of these are full frame cameras and they don't really help us because they are full frame, and the basic concept of lightweight is not applicable over here because they would be even more heavy than my most basic DSLR like Canon 1300D, 1500D or stuff like that, or maybe they are almost equal. So the basic logic of the mirrorless cameras being lightweight, it's not helping us at this point. But you would argue that Canon also has crop sensor mirrorless cameras. Now the problem with the crop sensor mirrorless cameras is that it's a completely different mount altogether, like the EOS M series. So we had the EOS different versions are there with different versions, but it's EOS M series. So that's the crop sensor mirrorless cameras by Canon. Not a lot of companies regrettably are making crop sensor mirrorless cameras. I don't know why, but they are not. But you need to understand that is that mount going to have a macro lens? So does the EOS M mount have a 100mm macro lens? It has a macro lens which is in the lower range of focal length. That's probably around 25, 28 or 30mm macro lens, but that lens is not going to be helpful for us because it's going to end up giving us a lot of distortion, and we don't want distortion in dental photography or any other form of clinical photography actually. So my basic question is, whatever camera that you select, is it going to have a macro lens in the focal length of the range 85 to 105? If the answer is yes to that, go ahead and buy it. I'm also waiting for one. So even I want to buy a mirrorless camera, but I feel I need to wait because I want to wait for the perfect macro lens to come in that category of mount of that mirrorless camera, which is currently not available. So although I can attach my 100mm DSLR 100mm lens to my mirrorless camera, but I need to use an adapter. So again, if I'm putting an adapter, it's going to have some weight, and it's also going to add on to your headache. Like you have a mirrorless camera, then you have an adapter, and then the lens will go in. If you don't have the adapter, the lens would not go in. So if you're actually building up a lot of issues for yourself. So I'm actually waiting for the time when Canon is going to come out with a crop sensor DSLR in the full frame mount that it has right now for the mirrorless cameras. So it's what I'm waiting for, and I think when it's going to have a crop sensor mirrorless camera in the beta mount, not the M mount, in the mirrorless category, I would be one of the first people who will be buying a mirrorless camera. But right now, it's not the right time to go for a crop sensor mirrorless camera in any of the companies that's available right now, according to me. So Canon has a mirrorless camera in the crop sensor, but it's not the right mount. And I also think one more thing, that the crop sensor mount in Canon, that's the M series of equipment, it's not going to evolve so much. It's not going to hold on for a very long time, because I think the full frame, the mirrorless that the Canon has right now, it's going to overtake on them, and you'll be seeing crop sensor cameras in that mirrorless mount category coming out maybe in the forthcoming years. But I'm definitely not investing on the M series mirrorless crop sensor cameras from Canon right now, because I don't think 100mm macro lens is going to be coming out in that particular mount soon, and I also foresee that this mount is not going to be living for a long time now. Do we have crop sensor in Nikon? I doubt if they make a good one, or if they even make one. Sony might have a crop sensor mirrorless camera, but again the question is, does it have a lens for clinical photography? So the answer to that is no, because although they have a 90mm lens, that is VR lens or a VC lens, that's vibration control or vibration reduction. You can also call it image stabilization. And we all know that clinical photography or dental photography is all about flash, and whenever you're using flash, we don't need a lens which is so heavy, which has image stabilization. So I actually see the basic point of making your equipment heavy with the use of mirrorless cameras is getting negated with a lens which is having image stabilization, which is very, very heavy in the Sony's correlation. So although your camera might be light, the lens is really heavy, so it's actually making no sense to shift to a mirrorless camera in Sony. The other issues that you might face if you buy a Sony mirrorless cameras is with respect to the accessories. You might not have the adequate amount of accessories that you wish you would have if you would have gone with Canon or a Nikon. But right now, neither Canon or Nikon is making a good crop sensor mirrorless camera. So my bottom line for people who are asking a lot about mirrorless cameras, it's not yet time. I would buy a crop sensor mirrorless camera body when I see a macro lens coming in the range of 85 to 105 mm focal length, and that would be the right time for me to transition from DSLR to a mirrorless camera. That's what I'm actually waiting for. Till that time, I'll probably just invest on Canon 1300D or Canon 1500D or any other basic DSLR from Canon which confirms 4 different requirements for me. I have 4 definite requirements that I want for the camera for clinical photography, which I've already mentioned in which is the best camera for dental photography or clinical photography. If you haven't heard it, do check out that particular episode, in which I have particularly mentioned what are the 4 things that you should have in a camera which is ideal for clinical and dental photography. So that's all for this particular podcast. If you have any questions, do put in the comments. And if you're listening and liking these particular episodes, do make sure to put in your review or testimony on the podcasting platforms like Apple, Google, Spotify, or any other podcasting platform of your choice, particularly Podchaser, because in Podchaser you can actually review a particular podcast. Thank you so much for joining me for today's podcast. I'll be looking forward to see you in the next episode. Bye-bye. That's all we have time for in this episode. If you're getting benefited from my tips, do show your love by leaving a rating and a review. For tutorials on photography, do check out my channel, Dental Photography School on YouTube. To participate in contests and live events, join the Dental Photography School Facebook and Telegram group. You can follow me on Instagram as Mayur_EOS Maestro or Dental Photography School. I'll meet you next week. Till then, keep listening, keep sharing.